I'm just going to it's so distracting to me. All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's shir. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all the Sherman Joshos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah Ben Zechariah and Dinah Bas Rabdov. To thank Art and Shari Miller for dedicating all the Sherman Joshos this month in memory of Art's brother, Reuven Ben Betzalel Rachel. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Ayal Sara Steinberg for the refuah of Shulamis Bas Susha. To thank our Day of Learning sponsors, Matt Marks, in memory of Charles Marks, Kalman Ben Mordechai Livracha, and to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Michael and Rachel Turniansky, in honor of the chasunah of their son, Yitzi Turniansky, to Jenny Tchoumak. May they build a bayis in Ne'eman B'Yisrael and a mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov. And we'll say with that, let us begin. Let us begin. So we'll say a lot to do today. Today's daf is Yotes 19. We are going to pick up Emirat Hashem on Yud Ches Amud Beis 18b. And we left off yesterday 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 lines up from the bottom. Maskil Rav Sini Bar Ashi. So remember again, the Gemara said as follows. The Gemara was trying to go ahead and deal with what appeared to be a contradiction between the halachos regarding chulin. Namely, again, remember the Mishnah introduced us to the idea of tara, of achieving ritual impurity for different items. So remember again, one of the interesting discussions we were having was for chulin. Does one have to go ahead and wash for chulin or not? So Maskil Rav Sini Bar Ashi, Ad kan lo pligi Rabban Ali Rabbi Meir, Ela ba'achila demaiser, Aval benegia demaiser, u'ba'achila d'chulin lo pligi. So Rav Sini Bar Ashi raised the point, and he said, the Rabbanan really argue on Rabbi Meir only when it comes to the consumption of meiser sheni. Ultimately, again, right, by consumption, that consumption requires netila. Aval benegia demaiser, u'ba'achila d'chulin lo pligi. When it comes to touching meiser sheni, or for that matter, the consumption of chulin, there doesn't seem to be an argument. Elo, idi v'idi ba'achila. Rather, you have to say that both the Mishnah and the Brisa are referring to chulin consumption. I say, how do I reconcile the contradiction? V'lo kashya, kan ba'achila dinamo, kan ba'achila deperi. One is talking about consumption of bread of chulin, and one is talking about consumption of fruit of chulin. The Mishnah that says that you have to go ahead and wash before eating chulin is talking about bread, versus the Brisa that said that one doesn't have to wash before the consumption of chulin is talking about fruit. As the Gemara says, Da'am Rav Nachman, Kalanotel Yodov Leperos, Hareze Megase Haruach. Ultimately, again, as Rav Nachman said, whoever washes before eating fruit, this is a sign of arrogance. We'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here, Kan Ba'achila Deperi. Rashi says, Hodik Tani Mashe Inkin B'maiser Ba'achila Deperi Kamar Umiyah B'truma Ba'inatila Shafilu B'mago who posts us wants to listen to this. So this actually yields for us a very, very, very important halacha l'maisa, piece of halacha l'maisa, which is the Gemara is making a distinction over here that not all forms of chulin are created equal. That it could very well be that, let's say, by fruits of chulin, one would not go ahead and wash, but by bread of chulin, one would go ahead and wash. And I will say, this, of course, as we know, how we paskin to this very day. I sent this out on the chat. So I will say, so this is again on the WhatsApp group. So this is, if you take a look in Siman Kuf Nun Chas, I wanted to share this with you because it's actually a very important halacha for you to see inside, which is as follows. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Nun Chas, Sif Aleph writes as follows: Kishiyavo le'echol pas. When a person comes to go ahead and eat bread, so Shulchan Aruch says, Shemavarchan alav hamotzi, yitol yadav. A person is supposed to wash his hands. Afilu einu yodea ein shum, einu yodea lehem shum tuma. Even if you know yourself to be absolutely, unequivocally, ritually pure, v'yivarich al netilas yadayim, and you have an obligation to wash al netilas. You make a bracha al netilas yadayim. Why is there an obligation to wash before we eat bread? So the Mishnah Berurah comments on this, and he says in Sifkat and Aleph, Tam takonos netilas yadayim mishnei devarim. There are two reasons why we wash before we eat bread. Echad mipnei srach truma. One is because ultimately, again, in order to safeguard truma. What does that mean? Kevan di'adayim askani osein v'nogi b'chol davar. ובזמן שהיה נוהג טומאה וטהרה הכהנים אכלו תרומה, היו צריכים ליטול ידיהם מדברי סופרים קודם אכילת תרומה, כדי שלא יטמאו בנגיעתן. וכדי let's listen to this. Mishnah Berurah explains, number one, Kohanim ate truma. The majority of truma was from wheat. Before Kohanim would eat truma, ultimately again, they would have to wash their hands. Again, that was even if a Kohen knew that he was totally ritually pure, there was a din of hand washing, netilas yadayim, before you eat truma. Ukedeshu Kohanim regilam HaKohanim bazeh, gazru gamkin al kol ish Yisrael ochel pas, she'asr le'echol ad she'yital yadav. The gam achshav she'ena Kohanim ochlim trum ne'tuma, lo batla takanazu. So I'll say this is fascinating. So it says in Mishnah Berurah, the first reason we wash before we eat bread is actually a safeguard to truma, because Kohanim eat truma. A Kohen, before he goes ahead and eats truma, has to wash his hands, and in order to ensure that Kohanim wash their hands before eating truma, the majority of which came from wheat, before we go ahead and we eat bread, we wash as well. So it's not about us. It's about safeguarding truma for the Kohanim. That's reason number one. Reason number two, the od tam l'takanas natila mishum nikias ukedusha. The some chubigmar as well as the other reason the Mishnah Berurah says is because ultimately again cleanliness and kedusha, nikias and kedusha. The Ramchal brings down in this idea that nikios, cleanliness, is one of the ways in which we reach kedusha. So I will say my point over here is this gemara that speaks about washing before bread of chulin is halacha l'maisa, and one of the reasons in which we wash for bread until this very day. Incredible. The gemara goes weiter. Tanrabanan. Both say very interesting sugya. Hanotel yadav. Niskavin yadav Toros. Lo niskavin yadav Timeos. What's an interesting idea? Person washes his hands. We're talking about natilas yadayim now in a kli, right? Washing hands from a utensil. So a person goes ahead and washes his hands from a utensil. If he had kavana, right? If he had kavana, now both say pashtos, kavana means he has kavana for tara, or kavana for a particular level of tara. So if he has kavana, he's tar, his hands are tar. If he didn't have kavana, his hands are not tar. V'china bil yadav. Similarly, again, if somebody immerses his hands. So both say that sounds just like what it is. We talked about this yesterday. Literally not immersing your body in a mikvah, just immersing your hands in a mikvah. So what's the halacha? Niskavin yadav toros, lo niskavin yadav tmeos. If you have kavana, your hands are niskavin yadav toros, lo niskavin yadav tmeos. So we'll say, what does it sound like over here? Sounds like for hand washing or hand immersion, in order for it to affect the necessary ritual purity, you have to have what? Kavana. Contrast that with the following. Vatanya, we learned, Bein niskavin, below niskavin yadav toros. Well, so we learned elsewhere, another brayso, whether you had kavana or didn't have kavana, when you immersed or you washed your hands are tar. Rav Nachman, lo kasha, it's not a contradiction. Kan lechulin, top of your test. Kan lemaiser. There's a distinction between washing or immersing for chulin versus washing and immersing for meiser sheni. If halach for chulin, you don't need any kavana. Right? For chulin, whether you wash your hands, immerse your hands, no kavana is necessary. But for meiser sheni, ultimately, again, you require kavana when immersing or washing hands. Now, Rashi points out, by the way, what's true for meiser sheni obviously is what? True for anything more kadosh than meiser sheni as well. So it'll be true for truma and anything else as well. So they must listen to this. Umina timra de chulin lo boy kavana. From where do we know that chulin won't require kavana? This not because we learned an interesting case. Gal shenitlash uba barim sar. Let's listen to this wild case. Let's say you have a wave of water, and the wave became detached from the sea. Now again, the mechanics of this case are not necessarily. You're trying to illustrate a principle, right? So let's imagine you have a huge wave, so huge that it's 40 sa'ah. Remember again, what's 40 sa'ah? What's 40 sa'ah? That's the share of a mikvah, right? 150 gallons, right? So yeah, you have a 40 sa'ah wave that's separated from the ocean. Now watch this. V'nafal ala adam v'ala kelim, and the wave falls on a person or on utensils, tahorin. They become tahor. In other words, that wave effectively acts as a mikvah, and therefore when it falls upon the person or it falls upon the utensils, it purifies them. So the Gemara said, well, what do you see from here? Katani adam dumya dekelim. Now, interestingly enough, we're comparing people to utensils. And therefore what? Ma kelim de lo mechavni, af adam de lo mechavein. Just as kelim, utensils, obviously again have no kavana, right? So you see the kelim, the utensils have no kavana, and the water is dumped on them, right? And they become tar. Just like the kelim have no kavana, the person doesn't need kavana as well. To which the Gemara says that seems to be an indication that halacha lemaisa. So, right, a person doesn't require any type of kavana for immersion. Umimai. Now, 1 second. Dilma biyoshiva mitzapa a masayit la shagal askina. Maybe not. Maybe the guy in question is sitting on the beach, and what is he waiting for? He's just waiting for that big detached wave. In other words, he's waiting for it. He's waiting for it, right? He knows it's going to come, and he has kavana for it. To which the Gemara says, "V'kelim dumya da adam." And maybe we can make the reverse drasha. The kelim are like people. How so? Ma adam debar kavana. Af kelim demachavin lehu. I was supposed to say, maybe we could set this up as a case where literally, again, the person is waiting for the wave. In other words, this is his kavana. He's waiting by the shore for the wave to become detached, fall upon him, and purify all of the utensils which are with him as well. V'chitema v'yoshevu mitzap and ma'ila memra. Well, if that's the case, maybe you think to yourself, if we're actually talking about a case where a person is sitting on the shore, right, and waiting for the wave to come, then what's the chiddush? Right? They will say, then what's the right thing about this? What's the chiddush in that? In other words, then that, of course that should work, because lamaisa, now you have, so will say, we're assuming right now that a detached wave works as a mikvah. We'll challenge that assertion in just a moment, but let's assume for a moment that we're taking that for granted. Detached waves, a 40 saw, work as a mikvah. And if you're telling me now that it's a case where a person is waiting on the shore, and he's waiting for the wave, right? He's just waiting for that 40 saw wave to come and to purify him. So then, what's the chiddush in saying that halacha l'maisa, he's going to be tar? To which the Gemara will tell you what the chiddush is. Sachadait chamina ligzar dilma asi lemitbal bechardolis shel gishamim. So I will say, I might have thought that you're not allowed to use a wave for immersion. Why can't you use a wave for immersion? Because maybe we should be concerned that halacha l'maisa you're going to come to end up using a literally again a current of rain. Current is probably the wrong word. A flow of rain. Now look at Rashi for just a moment. Chardolis, Rashi says, Sheshotefes vioredes mimakom gavoa. Listen to this case. Let's say it rains, right, and you have a slope. And the rain is collected and coming down the slope. And let's say in that what's the word? We'll call torrent of rain, right? In that flow of rain that's coming down, you have 40 saw. So the Rashi says over here, V'atova ba lo also lo tvila. Now we'll say again, we're not going to get into all the halachos of mikvos over here, but this is interesting to see. So imagine for a moment you have a slope and you have 40 saw of rainwater coming down that slope. So the halacha is that does not constitute a kosher mikvah. Lo also lo tvila. Mishum de makom kitafresu makom zakof yoser midai umem sa'ashebo inon b'makom echad. So it's actually a very interesting halacha in Hilchos Mikvos. If you have a slope that is too steep, the flow is not considered to be one entity, but each part of the flow is considered to be detached from the other. That means kitafrus means a slope. So if you have a slope that's very steep, then halacha l'maisa, even though you have a flow of 40 saw, the flow is not considered to be contiguous, and therefore again will not work as a mikvah. And again, Rashi goes on, Utnan, hanitzog v'kitafrus eno chibor, va'afim eno kitafrus nami in tovlin bo, lefishen me yishamim mitarim derech zechilason, ad shu nikvin derech ashboren. The Sanyo, so we'll say, so again, there's another issue. Rainwater only works for a mikvah when it's collected. So we'll say there's actually a different, interesting halacha by Hilchos Mikvahos, which is different forms of water work as a mikvah in different ways. For example, a river works even if it's a flowing river. Rainwater only works if it's pooled and collected. So it happens to be in this situation where the rainwater is running down the side of a slope. It's not going to work for two reasons. Number one, because the slope generally doesn't work for mikvahos. That's number one, because it's not considered to be as if all the water is connected. And number two, rainwater only works for a mikvah when it's pulled and collected. So now let's get back to this. Remember again, let's go back to our guy waiting on the beach for the wave. Right? He's waiting for the wave on the beach. So right, a Jew waits for a different kind of wave. You see, everybody waits, but a Jew waits for a mikvah. Some people wait to surf, some people wait for a mikvah. Right? So ultimately he's waiting for his wave. So remember again, the Gemara said, well, what's the chiddush? If he's waiting for the wave, and the wave has 40 sa'ah, and it washes over him that he's tahar, what's the chiddush in that? Because after all, again, he's waiting for it, and it's 40 sa'ah of water. I'll tell you what the chiddush is. You might have thought that such an immersion should not work. Why? Because if we allow you to use this wave, what may you come to use? Chardalis shal gishamim. You may come to use a flow of rainwater down a slope. Right? Maybe you'll stand at Shabbos. I think about it just a moment. It's pouring, right? There's 40 of rainwater coming down the slope, the side of the mountain, whatever side of the hill. I have a great way to use the mikvah. How do I do it? Just stand against the side of the slope, and that's it. And that's it. And that's the mikvah. Let the water wash over me. So remember again, we saw that doesn't work for two reasons. Number one, because a slope, when it's too steep, causes the water to kind of be viewed as disparate parts. And number two, rainwater only works when it's pooled. You might have thought that if we allow you to use the wave, you may come to go ahead and use the rainwater. Inami, nigzar Russian atu kipin. The boss said there's another issue with the wave. What's the other issue with the wave? See, the wave only works if what? If you're actually immersed in the water. But if you're in the middle of the wave, right, what the Gemara calls the kippah. In other words, Rabbi, remember again, the middle of the wave, of course, is what? Is air, right? It's not water. Maybe you have to be concerned that a person may end up relying, maybe in the middle of the wave, right? Not the water part of the wave, and may think that they could accomplish immersion like that. Kamash malon delo gazrinan. Kamash, we're not concerned. We allow you to use the wave. We're not concerned you're going to come to use rainwater, and we're not concerned that you're going to end up being what we call the kippah, right, in the middle of the wave. So the Gemara says, "Umina temer delo matbilin bekipin." This is actually very interesting. It's an interesting havamina. How do you know, the Gemara says, that halacha lamaisa, you can't use what the Gemara calls the kippah, the inside of the wave? How do you know that if you're on the inside of the wave, that it doesn't work for immersion purposes? Tisanya, because we're in the Braisa, matbilin barashin, vein matbilin mikipin. Okay, so this is pretty explicit. You could be told about barashin. Rashi says Rashin, echad meirashi hagal kishumagia la'aretz. You can go ahead and immerse yourself literally again in the head of the wave. We'll say, what's the head of the wave? That's the part of the wave that crashes down. So you could go ahead and immerse yourself in the head of the wave as it's coming down, but not in the kipin. Rashi says, kipin and sa'iso shalgal, the middle of the wave, sha'omed ba'avir kimin kippah. That literally, again, it stands in the air just like a kippah, like a yarmulke, right? It sits over you. Vim hoshit kelin lamala, vit bilan b'kippah, eino tvila. So the Gemara says, so you could go in and you could use the head of the wave, but you can't use the kippah of the wave. So the Gemara says, Lefishe matbilan ba'aver. And there's a very simple reason. Why can't you use the kippah? Right? Why can't you use the interior of the wave? Why? Because it's air, not water. See, Rabbi said the havamina is that maybe if you're in the middle of the wave, maybe how do we look at that? Like you're in it, right? That you're in. I mean, you are. I'm literally inside the wave, and obviously I'm in an air pocket in the middle of the wave. But lamaisa, I'm in the middle of the wave. So maybe being surrounded by water is ki'ilu kiviyachal, like you're in the water itself. Kamash malon, no. Tevila requires actual immersion in the water. Incredible. So the Gemara says elameha. So fine. So both says we left that elameha, and both say now let's go back for just a second. Remember. What are we dealing with over here? We're trying to figure out, does immersion for chulin require kavanah? Right? That's where we're holding over here. Because remember again, we had the Braisa, right? The Braisa said if you have kavanah, the immersion works. If you don't have kavanah, the immersion doesn't work. Right? So how do we reconcile? Rav Nachman wanted to say, for chulin, you don't need kavanah. For Meiser Sheni and above, you do require kavanah. Then Abba said, we're trying to figure out, is that true? So in other words, what is the story? Now that we've established that chulin does require immersion, like we saw in the Mishnah, So halacha l'maisa, or I shouldn't say immersion. It requires netila of some sort, right? Whether it's netilas yadayim, tevilas yadayim, ultimately is kavana necessary or not? So the Gemara says, Elameha. Rather, let's learn it out from here. An interesting case. Disnan peros shenaf lulusoch amasamayim. Those are really a lot of interesting cases here. So you have fruit that fell into a channel of water. Amasamayim is like a small stream or a channel. So fruit fell into a stream or a channel of water. Upashat misheyadav tameos vinatlan. So we'll say, now watch this case. So my fruit fell into a small stream of water. My hands happened to be tameh. However, they became tameh. I reached my hands into the stream to recover the fruit. So what's the halacha? Right? Vinatlan, yadav tahoros. My hands are tahar. Why are my hands tahar? I immersed them into a stream. Right? Upeiros einon bichiyutan. All right, boss, there's a lot of stuff happening over here. Remember, in order for produce to become the kabel tumah, to be able to receive tumah, what has to happen? That has to happen. Hechsher. They have to be made receptive. How is produce made receptive to tumah? By coming in contact with one of the 7 liquids. But again, even that only occurs when? If a person had in mind, had kavana, or wanted their fruit, their produce to become wet. In other words, I'll give you a perfect example. If I have a basket of apples and I accidentally left them outdoors, so that the next morning comes and the dew is upon them, are they receptive to tumah? No. Why? Because it wasn't my kavana that they become wet. So watch the case over here. The case over here is I dropped my apple, it fell into a stream. I go ahead and I put my hand into the stream in order to retrieve the apple. So what does the Brisa say? Let's work backwards. What's the status of my apple? It's not right. It's the cut. Right. Good. Correct. According to most opinions, apples are kosher. Yeah, that is correct. Nice. Thank you. Let's say so again. For our purposes, for tumah purposes, it's not receptive to tumah because again, I didn't have kavanah that it should be wet. But something interesting did happen, which is when I put my hand into the water to retrieve the apple, my hand became tar. So we'll say that clearly paints a picture that what? That immersion of hands does not require kavanah. Okay, hold on to that. Now watch this. However, if I put my hand into the stream for the purpose of purifying my hands, then what? Listen to this. Yadav tahoros. My hands are tahar, and not only that, va'peros hare hein bichiyutan. My fruit is now receptive lakabel tumah. The Rebbe say now, right? Why am my fruit receptive lakabel tumah? Because in this case, Rashi points out, since I want my hands to be tar, I have kavanah to immerse my hands. That means I'm happy my fruit fell into the stream. Because since my fruit fell into the stream and I have to retrieve my fruit, that becomes the vehicle through which I purify my hands, which means I'm happy my fruit became wet, and therefore now they're receptive to tumah. Well, I'll say, but again, for our purposes, what do you see from here? You see from here that for at least for chulin purposes, hands can become tar even without what? Even without any kind of kavanah. It's really a fascinating case. So Eisvei Rabba, the Rab Nachman. So Rabba raised the question to Rab Nachman, Hatovel l'chulin. So also remember again, Rab Nachman is of the opinion that immersion for chulin does not require kavanah. Does not require kavanah. Se'esvei Rabba l'Rab Nachman. So Rabba raised the kasha to Rab Nachman, Hatovel l'chulin v'hochsak l'chulin aser l'maiser. But let's say this is really fascinating cases here. So watch this. A person goes to the mikvah or I told in this case a person is immersing. So whether you're talking about immersing your body or immersing your hands, it doesn't really matter. So a person immerses for a purpose of chulin. So what's the halacha? V'hochsak l'chulin. And again, let's remember again, we saw some Mishnah. Hochsak means what? My kavana is for chulin. Asr l'maiser. Ultimately, again, that immersion does not work for maiser shini. But this is what we saw in the Mishnah. This is the Mishnah. Hochsak in, lo hochsak lo. What do you see from here? You see from here that an immersion for chulin only works if what? If you had kavanah. If you had kavanah, we'll say lashon of hochsak means I have kavanah. The Mishnah told me, I go to the mikvah for the purpose of eating chulin. That immersion works for chulin, doesn't work for maiser sheni. But again, leaving aside maiser sheni, you see from here that immersion for chulin itself requires a kavanah. No, to which the Gemara says, no, Rav Nachman will say, Hachi Kamar, Afa pi shehuchzak l'chulin, asr l'maiser. No, what it means is like this, that even though halacha l'maisa, I had kavana for chulin, so in other words, even though I had kavana for this immersion, that kavana will only work for chulin, it will not work for maiser sheni. Okay, raise another kasha. Esvei, tava v'lohuchzak. Mishnah said, if you went to the mikvah, but you didn't have any specific kavana, so I went to the mikvah, and there was no lohuchzak, no kavana at all, kilu lo tava. It's as if I did not go to the mikveh at all. My love kilo tava klal doesn't that mean that it's as if I didn't go to the mikveh at all. Kilo tava klal lo kilo lo tava la meiser aval tava la chulik. No. What it means is that if you go to the mikveh without any kavana, it works, but it only works for the bare for what we'll call the bare minimum. So what's the bare minimum? Chulin. In other words, so immersion without kavana will work for chulin, but nothing above chulin. Okay? Who's savar? Dochi kamat chile. See, he thought that Rav Nachman was just kind of putting him off, right? Wasn't seriously answering him. Nafak dak va'ashkach. He went out and he found another brisa that said, Talvo v'lohochsak. If a person went to the mikvah and ultimately again didn't have any specific kavanah, asr l'maiser umotra l'chulin. Ultimately, again, such a person will be usher to go ahead and eat meiser sheni, but will be mutter and chulin. Which Shabbos is actually very interesting. This is actually how the Rambam paskins, which is I don't want to ruin it, but we're gonna discuss this idea that really immersion for chulin doesn't require any level of kavanah. Doesn't require any level of kavanah. And if you go to the mikvah and have absolutely no kavanah, that will allow you to eat chulin in a state of ritual purity. But anything above chulin, which is meiser sheni and above, is going to require some level of kavana during immersion. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Amar Belazar, both say tava va'atzon. Another very interesting case. So I just want to point out what does come out of halacha l'maisa is that immersion for chulin does not require kavana. And again, this is true if you're talking about full body immersion, or this is true if you're washing or going ahead and immersing your hands. Anything done for chulin never requires kavana. Anything above chulin is going to require some level of kavana. Now, along the same lines of kavana, this is really interesting. Amar Lazar, tava va'ala umachzik atzmo l'chol mashiyirtzeh. So I'm sorry. Tava va'ala machzik atzmo l'chol mashiyirtzeh. Listen to this. His Rabbi Lazar says, if you go to the mikvah, listen to this case. I go to the mikvah, I come out of the mikvah. I will say now, what it sounds like over here is as follows. When I was in the mikvah, I didn't have any specific intent for anything special. Now I'm coming out of the mikvah. I could have in mind that this immersion should work for whatever level I want it to work for. All right, so tava, I go to the mikvah. Va'ala, I come out of the mikvah with no specific intent so far. Now again, I will say, right, I could go ahead and establish myself for chulin, meiser sheni, truma, whatever I want. So meisvei. But I will say, by the way, what a profound statement if you think about it. Also, b'derech hashkafa. Sometimes I will say tava va'ala. Person goes to the mikveh. You know what the beautiful part about going to the mikveh is that again, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, why does going to a mikveh affect so much? If you think about this, by the way, right? Mikveh plays such a central role in Judaism. Person converts, they go to the mikveh, right? Ultimately, again, a person is tameh, right? I go to whatever level of tumah it is, hilchos nida, tuman tara, whatever it is, you go to a mikveh, and mikveh is like a new start. What's the pshat? Rabbi Soloveitchik says so beautifully. He says, if you think about it, he calls it water is the primordial substance of the universe. In other words, when we open up Sefer Bereshis, right? Va'aretz haisa sohu vavo, v'ruach elokim merachafes apnei hamayim. Water was the first thing that was here. So in other words, even when the world is tohu vavohu, there's water everywhere. See, Rabbi said the power of covering yourself in water is you're covering yourself literally with the very building block of creation. This is why the most dramatic example of this is by Gerus, right? It's an amazing thing. So you could have a person who's living a Jewish lifestyle in every single way, right? The ger is keeping Torah, mitzvahs, everything, accepted theologically, everything. The ger is only a convert when he or she goes in and comes out of the water. Nothing happens without the water, right? Nothing happens without the water. Everything is about the mikvah. Without a kosher mikvah, there is no gerus. And again, what's halacha by a ger? Gershin is gayer kekatan shenola dami. When a person converts, it's like they're reborn. It's a rebirth. When I cover myself in the primordial substance of the universe, it's as if, and this is why person goes to the mikvah before Yomim Noraim. Person goes to the mikvah erev Shabbos. Person goes to the mikvah. Chassidim, they go to the mikvah every day. What is it? It's a rebirth. It's literally a rebirth. That's what it is. And I say, how beautiful is it? You know what happens when you have a rebirth? You know what happens? Taval va'ala. You go to the mikvah. You have a rebirth. Machzik atzmo l'chol ma sheyirtzeh. You can become whatever you want. You can become whatever you want. The power of a new start is you can become whatever you want. But I have news for you. The truth is, you could have the restart even without a mikvah. Right? Even without a mikvah. Tumantari in a mikvah. But the truth is, let's say I decide for myself, you know what? I want a new beginning. I want a tabla rasa. I just want a new slate. Rabbi says, you know what the greatest power of the Jew is? The greatest power, and we often don't even realize it. How many new beginnings do you get in life? As many as you want. The moment you decide you want to live differently, the moment I decide I want to be a different person, the moment I decide I want life to be something different than it currently is, I have the ability for a new start. I will say, I could literally withdraw into myself for just a moment and say, I'm going into my personalistic mikvah. I'm retreating into myself. And when I come back out, I'm a new person into a new world. And I will say it works. It works. And when you're tovel into yourself, when you retreat into yourself in order to come out someone new, ultimately taval va'ala. I immerse inside of myself. I want to come out someone new. What's the halacha? Machzik asmo l'cha mashi yirtzeh. I will say it's Monday morning. You want today to be something different. You want this week to be something different. Immerse in the mikvah of new beginnings, which is a mikvah that is open 24/7. You can immerse in it as many times as you want. You don't even have to leave the comfort of your own home. The mikvah of new beginnings is all around us. Immerse in it, come up from it, and become whatever you want. The greatest power of a new beginning, I both say, is accessible whenever and wherever we want it. And when you come out of that mikvah of new beginning, there's no telling what you could accomplish. Meisvei, Gemara is a kasha, not a kasha what we just said, a kasha on the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Odeo, listen to this case, Odeo regal achas b'mayim, hochsak l'davar kal, machzik as l'davar chamar. Allah, shuven machzik. So let's listen to this. We have another brisa. If your foot is still in the mikvah, so ultimately, again, even if you had in mind to immerse for a lower level, right? Let's say for chulin, you could change your mind and use your immersion for something more chamer, like Meiser Sheni. But ultimately, again, once you remove your foot from the mikvah, then what? Shuv eno machzik. Ultimately, again, you cannot go ahead and establish yourself for any level of immersion, or for any level of TORAH, I should say. My love eno machzik klal. Doesn't that mean that halacha l'maisa, once you've left the mikvah, if you didn't have any kavanah, it's as if the immersion didn't happen at all? Lo, odeo, listen to this, Rabbi say, listen to this, if your foot is still in the mikvah, afapi shehochzak machzik Allah. So I said, listen to this, sorry, machzik, but listen to this, if your foot's still in the mikvah, this is incredible. If your foot is still in the mikvah, then halacha l'maisa, even if you immersed with a specific intent, you could change that intent. So in other words, we'll say what this is saying is, I went to the mikvah for chulin. Now let's say I'm coming out of the mikvah, but my foot is still in the mikvah, I could change my intention for Meiser Sheni, or for Truma. However, again, Allah, once I come out of the mikvah, im lo hochzak machzik. Let's listen to this. When I came out of the mikvah, if when I immersed, I didn't have any specific intent, so I could still establish specific intent even though I'm out of the mikvah. But if when I immersed, I had specific intent, then once I leave the mikvah, I can't change. I will say there's so much to say about these Gemaras. Just legabe again how we forge our own identities. But let's finish the daf first, then we'll come back. So Mantana. Oh, there, I will say, such a fascinating halacha. Such a fascinating halacha. I will say, and again, the core point, if I show you one thing, the core point to remember this, I will say, is, here's what's amazing about this, which is, I'm going to the mikvah, but what do you see? Actions by themselves are not enough. Kavanas make a difference. It's not just what you do, but it's what you think that shapes what you do as well. You would think to yourself, I'm going to the mikvah. It doesn't matter what I think. I'm thinking about tchulin, I'm thinking about truma, I'm thinking about paraduma. Who cares? I'm going to the mikvah. Once I go to the mikvah, again, mission accomplished. No, it's not true. It's not just what you do. It's what you think that matters also. It's your kabbanas that have an impact on your actions as well. So, mantana odeh regel achas b'mayim. Who is the opinion who says, Rabbosai, that if you have 1 foot inside of the mikvah, this is a great case, but so exciting. I'll say, so who's the opinion that says that if you have 1 foot inside of the mikvah, you can still go ahead and change your mindset, right? You could change your kavanas. Who is that? Amrei Pedas, Rabbi Hudi. It's Rabbi Huda. So we'll say, remember again, because what did we just say? What did we just say? If, let's say I went to the mikvah, and I immersed for what purpose? I immersed for chulin. I'm coming out of the mikvah. Can I change my immersion to work for my susheni? Can I do that? It depends. What does it depend on? If halacha l'maisa, my foot is still in the water, I can change my kavana. Once my foot left the water, if I immerse for the purpose of chulin, then halacha l'maisa, I can't change it for my susheni. Well, we just saw, however, if I immersed with no intention, then I can change it for my susheni. Who is the opinion who says that having a foot in the mikvah allows you to change the purpose for which you immersed? It's Rabbi Huda. Let's listen to this case. Great case. This mikvah shenim nan v'yeshua abayim sa'a mechuvanos. Watch this case. You go to a mikvah. The mikvah has exactly 40 sa'a. Exactly. And remember, 40 sa'a is the minimum measurement of a mikvah. V'yardu shnayim v'tavlu ze'achar zeh. 2 guys go to the mikvah, one after the other. The Rebbe will say, what's the problem with 2 guys going to the mikvah, one after the other? Remember again, you have exactly 40 sa'ah. Every single time you go to the mikvah, obviously when you come out, don't read any other problems into this, right? Just about water problem right now. Right? So I'll say, so again, Lamaisa again, when guy, we'll call him Reuven and Shimon, when Reuven comes out, some of the water comes with him. Which I both say, technically speaking, means that when Shimon immerses, remember again, the imagery over here is Reuven goes in, right? Reuven's coming out, Shimon's going in. So as Reuven's going out, remember again, you see this, by the way, by the mikvos, if you ever go by the southern wall excavations, right, by the Kosel, so they have these mikvos, and the mikvos, they're going to have 2 sets of staircases, right? 1 staircase in, 1 staircase out, because it was like assembly line mikvos. You went in, you went out. So you can imagine, again, Reuven's coming out, Shimon's coming in. If it's exactly 40 sa'ah, here's the problem. They get to say Shalom Aleichem to each other, but on Reuven's way out, he's also taking some of the water with him, which means that halacha l'maisa, technically speaking, Shimon is immersing in a mikveh that's less than 40 sa'ah. So watch this. So the Gemara says, "V'yadushteim v'tablu zechar zeh harishon tar v'asheni tameh." Watch this. So Reuven had a good immersion. Shimon does not. Because Shimon is effectively immersing in a deficient mikvah. Rabbi Huda says, listen to this. Rabbi Huda says, what do we tell Reuven? Just stand in the water, right? As long as Reuven is standing there, while Shimon ultimately again is immersing, he's good. Why? Because as long as Reuven is standing in the mikvah, then what? He's effectively part of the mikvah, which means any water that is upon him is also part of the mikvah. Amar Nachman Rabba, machlokes b'ma'alos d'Rabbanan. Rabbi said this whole machlokes over here between Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanan. In other words, Rabbi said, so this machlokes of you have a mikvah of exactly 40 sa'ah, right? Reuven's going out, Shimon's coming in. So the Rabbanan say Reuven's tar, Shimon's tameh. Rabbi Huda says as long as Reuven stands in the mikvah, all he needs is a foot in the mikvah, we're good. Everybody's good because he's considered to be attached to the mikvah. The Gemara says that's only when the immersions in questions are immersions necessary midrabanan. But if we're talking about Tumah D'Oraisa, Divrei HaKol Af Hasheni Tameh, or I should say, they take off Af. Divrei HaKol Hasheni Tameh. Everybody will agree that by biblical, this ability that if your foot's in the mikvah, you're kind of attached to the mikvah, that works for rabbinic immersions, but will not work for biblical immersions. V'hainu d'Rabbi Pedas. And Abba said this ultimately again reflects the view of Rabbi Pedas. That Rabbi Pedas ultimately again is the one who said before, and Rashi says, Da'oki la'el ha da'odaihu k'Rabbi Huda v'lo k'Rabbana. Fine, but Sigmar's Ikadarmi, an alternate version of this. Amar Rav Nachman Rav Baravua, machlokes mituma l'tara. The machlokes between Rabbi Huda and the Rabbana is only by tumah and tara. Aval b'mal, which means daraisa. Aval b'malos t'Rabbanon, divrei hakol af hasheni tar. When it comes to dinei d'Rabbanon, everyone agrees that ultimately Shimon will be tar, as long as what? As long as Reuven is still standing in the mikvah. Upligid Rabbi Pedas, and in this case we'll argue Rabbi Pedas. Okay, so we'll say Samach Lokis, different versions. Rabbi will say what you begin to see is something really fascinating. That when it comes to rabbinic immersions, having a foot in the mikvah is as if what? You're still in the mikvah. Now we see two ramifications of that. Ramification number one is that if you have a foot in the mikvah, you could change your immersion intention. So if I immerse for the purpose of chulin, and now I want to change it to truma, I want to change the truma, can I change it? As long as my foot is in the mikvah. And again, second ramification of that is that halacha l'maisa, if you have exactly a mikvah 40 sa'ah, and Reuven's going out and Shimon's coming in, if Reuven left the mikvah already, Shimon does not have a valid immersion because Shimon is immersing in a deficient mikvah. But as long as Reuven is still standing in the mikvah, even if he's not immersed, still standing in the mikvah, Shimon's immersion is good. But again, I both say this ability to have a foot in the mikvah count as if you're still in the mikvah, the Gemara says only works when? By rabbinic immersions, not by biblical ones. Incredible. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Huda, Rabbi Huda, Ma'u lahatil machtin v'tzinoros b'roshel shal rishon. Both say, this is great. Listen to this. So Rabbi Huda is the one who says that if you have a foot in the mikvah, remember again, Rabbi Huda is the one who said, Reuven and Shimon are going to the mikvah. Right? Reuven goes in, 40 saw. Reuven's coming out, Shimon's coming in. What do we tell Reuven? What do we tell him? Just stay. Just keep a foot in the mikvah until Shimon is finished. According to Rabbi Huda, Rabbi say, listen to this. Which means that essentially the way we view Reuven is that Reuven is effectively what? In the mikvah. He's in the mikvah. So the Gemara says like this: can we immerse things on Reuven's head? So could I take needles, small needles, and immerse them on Reuven's head? There's some water on Reuven's head. Could I immerse that? Because obviously Reuven is considered as if he's attached to the mikvah. He's in the mikvah. So can I immerse some stuff on his head? And will that count as if it's been immersed in a mikvah? So ma'ulahat bil machtin b'tzinos baroshel sharishon. So now watch this. Good achis is the Rabbi Huda good asik lesle. Al dilma good asik names. So remember again, what's the principle involved over here? The principle involved over here is back to Eruvin is good asik. Rabbi say good asik means we view things as extending downwards. So as long as Reuven has a foot in the mikvah, we view all the water on his body as extending downward into the mikvah. So does Rabbi Huda say we just say good asik, or does he also be called good achis? So we'll say what's good achis? Good asik. Oh, good achis is going upwards. So do we view the water on Reuven's body as so exciting as extending upwards as well? Fascinating. We view all the water on his body as extending downwards. Can we view the water on his body as extending upwards as well? Amalei Tinisua, we learn this. Shalosh kamamios benachal. I will imagine the following situation. You have three pits, gumos, right? Three pits, right? Benachal, along a Yisrina. Now the truth is, this is happening. These three pits are situated on a slope as well. So the Gemara says, Ha'olyona, ha'tachtona v'imtsois. Right? An upper one, a middle one, and a lower one. Watch this. Rashi says, Gomamios, gumos benachali shipui harim. So if you could imagine, these three pits are situated on the side of a mountain. So watch this. So the Gemara says, Ha'elyona v'atachtona. So listen to the good. It says Ha'elyona v'atachtona esrim. The upper pit and the lower pit each have 20 saw, right? V'imtsois shalar ba'im saw. The middle one has 40 sa. V'chardolas shel gishamim overes beinehem. And there's a torrent of rainwater that flows between them. So we'll say, so now what's going to happen? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Meir Haya Omer, Matpil Be'al Yona. Rabbi Meir said, you could even go ahead and immerse in the upper pit. So we'll say, here what's happening over here? 3 pits on the side of a mountain. There's, right, the upper pit has 20 sa, lower pit has 20 sa, middle pit has 40 sa. Well, 40 sa is a valid mikvah. What's going to be the shayla? Can you immerse in the upper or lower one? Rabbi Meir says, you could even immerse in the upper one. Right? They both say, why? Why can you immerse in the upper one? What do we say? Good achis. We view waters as extending. It's a flow. They're all connected. So we can view the waters as extending upwards as well. Ayva Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Meir, you thought I wasn't going to finish the daf. You thought. I know. I saw your looks of disbelief. So watch this, Rabbi Osai. So Meir, Haya Omer, Matbil Be'al Yona. I got this, right? So ultimately, again, so Osai says, yeah, we learned. Meir says you could go ahead and immerse in the upper one. Va'ani Omer b'tachtona ve'lo Be'al Yona. But I say you could only go ahead and immerse in the lower one, but not in the Rabbi Yehuda says, I say you can only immerse in the lower one, not in the upper one. Amalei said to him, Itanya Tanya. If that's Hayod, then that's Hayod. So I will say, so what you see over here is a fundamental machlokes to whether or not we say good achis or good asik. In other words, I will say this is a general machlokes about how we pass halacha lemaisa. It's clear from the mikveh case that we hold good asik, that we view the water as extending downwards, right? Because we say, Reuven, just keep a foot in the mikvah and the water is viewed as if it extends downwards. Whether or not we could say good achis or good asik, could we view the water as going upwards? That's a machlokes. Incredible. Hatova l'chulin v'ochsek l'chulin. So the Gemara says, Mani mas nisin. Whose opinion is reflected in the Mishnah? So the Gemara says, Rabbanon hi Tishani luhu bein chulin l'maiser. I will say our Mishnah reflects the view of the Rabbanon, who hold that halacha l'maisa there is a distinction between immersion, or there is a general distinction between chulin and maiser sheni. Yet ema seifa. Look at the end of the Mishnah. Big day ama aretz medras leprushin. Big day prushin medras laochle truma. Yet Rabbi say, look at the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah said, we saw this in yesterday's daf, that the clothing of an ama aretz is considered to have tumas medras for prushin. And yet the clothing of prushin is considered to have tumas medras for those who eat truma. Rabbi say, we saw this in yesterday's daf. That a sa'an Rabbi Meir, da amar chulin u'maiser kehadadininhu. That reflects the view of Rabbi Meir, who says that chulin and maiser sheni are of the same status. Well, if that's the case, Reish Rabbanon v'Sefer Rabbi Meir, are you telling me that the beginning of the Mishnah reflects the view of the Rabbanon and the end reflects the view of Rabbi Meir? In Reish Rabbanon v'Sefer Rabbi Meir. Ultimately, again, yes, that is indeed the case. The first part of the Mishnah is the Rabbanon. The end is Rabbi Meir. Say, now, ideally, we don't like to do this. We don't like to attribute authorship of the Mishnah, the Reisha to one opinion, Sefer to a different opinion. But if we have to do that, we'll do that. So the Gemara says, Adam masni la b'Sefer chamish ma'alos. Umuki la kula kirabanan. On the other hand, again, Rabbi Meir had a different version. Rav Acha bar Ada had a different version of the Mishnah. In his version of the Mishnah, he created 5 categories of the Tumas Medras, right? The clothing of this is like this one for this. The clothing like this, and like this. And he had a category in between Chulin and Maiser Sheni, and ultimately set up the Mishnah like the Rabban. I'll also establish for today. We'll pick up again with this distinction between Chulin and Maiser Sheni, and Me'eretz Hashem tomorrow again. Shkoyach.